At bizval, we are passionate about empowering entrepreneurs the world over. In the bizval podcast, we showcase stories of real entrepreneurs and advisors, sharing lessons and inspiration from their journeys to make your journey just that little bit easier. Today, I'm joined by an inspirational entrepreneur, second generation immigrant, trailblazer, finance executive, and the founder of 360 Finance, Arta Ramaj. I hope I got the pronunciation right. And Arta, it's awesome to have you here today. For our listeners who may not know you yet, can you just give us a quick snapshot of who you are and what 360 Finance is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, thank you for having me, Graham. It's really exciting to be here. I'll do a quick intro. So yeah, I'm Arta. I am the co-founder of 360 Finance from London, run the business with my fiance. We're a small team of 4 people. And what we do is financial modeling and FP&A services for startups, scale-ups, PE-backed funds. Yeah, really exciting, high-impact work.
Fantastic. So I think just for all the listeners today, just to give you a little bit of insight, what we're going to chat to you about is, in today's world, access to the internet or an internet connection has really made building a global business or business from anywhere possible. I think today Art is in fact not sitting in London. She's sitting in Albania, her home country. So the reality, though, in practice is that physical location, the right support structures, legal frameworks, the cultures that we're operating in on a day-to-day basis still influence how you go about building a business. Okay, you can do the work from anywhere. And I think what today is about is unpacking a little bit of that. So Arta's background, she was born, and we'll go into a little bit of this detail just now, but she was born in Albania. She started from her parents almost started as zero, as first generation immigrants into the United Kingdom. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, starting from zero, things like what we call the immigrant edge, this pressure to succeed. I'm not going to give it all away in the intro, but we're going to talk about building a business as an immigrant in another country. And Archer's got a really cool story to share, as well as building a business with purpose. So I think I'm going to dive straight in. I hope I haven't taken all your background away, but Archer, we're going to talk a bit about your, let's call your origin story. Don't you want to share a little bit about your background? Where did you grow up, and what was life like in your early years?
I was born in Albania. My parents decided to move to the UK when I was just a baby. I was 2 years old. So early years in Albania, very faint memories, barely any, to be honest. And yeah, I grew up in London. My parents moved for a better life, I would say. Just that the Balkan region in general at that time was quite unstable, shall I say. The fall of communism in the 90s made it a little bit dangerous, lawless at times, just a lot of corruption, especially political corruption going on, and war breaking out in surrounding areas. So my parents decided to leave ultimately for a better life for me at the time, and then my brother, who was born in the UK. And yeah, with that, they moved over and we came to London. And growing up in London was great. When I look back at my childhood, I had a great childhood. But I would say that I had this niggling feeling that I had this golden ticket of some sort. I don't know how to describe it, but my parents would always tell me, "You're lucky.
Yeah.
You've got opportunities that people back home don't have." And so, you know, you're one of the lucky ones and you've got to make it count. And I think hearing that from a young age made me really motivated. And yeah, almost hyper aware of this opportunity that I had in my hands being in a different country.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because, I mean, as I say, we're talking to a global audience here, and you're often framed by the environment you're in, and as you say, you've had this opportunity you've taken with both hands, but as much as there was this opportunity and it got kind of, your parents kind of made you aware of that. What was it like growing up in the UK, I guess, in a first generation immigrant family? So for your parents, they weren't 2 years old. They already had a life back home and trying to establish themselves. I mean, you grew up there, so that's really all you knew. But yeah, you must have experienced some things growing up that, like, we're a little bit different. We've got to do things differently. What was that like?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and there's a lot to unpack there. I think as you say, as a child, I didn't know any different. I was just kind of in the present moment and living life as a child normally does. But for my parents, that transition was a lot harder. And I remember them working really hard, multiple jobs each, trying to make ends meet. And as a result, I, as a child, wasn't missing anything. I had everything that I wanted.
Yeah.
But I almost had this hyper awareness that they were working super hard and life wasn't easy for them.
Yeah.
So there was that. And I think as well for them, they tell me so many interesting stories these days, but for them it was difficult, particularly because they had grown up in a certain culture. That was all they knew. And they left all of that, right? So coming here was probably lonely in a lot of ways for them. And they held on to that culture really tightly. Naturally, it was all they knew. So it was interesting for me growing up in that kind of family as a child, because there's this duality, right? You at home, I was Albanian, we spoke Albanian, food was Albanian, culture, everything. But then I had to navigate life at school and with friends with completely different rules. So it's a really interesting duality that I think can be confusing sometimes as a child. At least I can say I was a little confused by it at times. But growing up, I've realized that, if anything, it's a superpower.
I think, as your parents said, you're one of the lucky ones. It seems like, they understood, yes, it was hard for them, but they wanted to give you a platform to kind of, the world is your oyster. And it seems like they were very encouraging and supportive of, you building that platform early on. Can you maybe just talk about a couple of things, specifically the role that your family and those sort of cultural values, how did they play into your sort of early ambitions? And, maybe as an older teenager, and then kind of a second question from that, was entrepreneurship something that you kind of always envisaged early on, when you kind of started getting to the end of school and studying and all of that, did you think, hey, I'm going to become an entrepreneur? So maybe if you can tackle those two, Arta.
I think my parents have influenced my mentality in so many ways. They were always like huge champions of hard work gets you places. And if you work hard, you'll get the results that you want. I think
Yeah,
them moving countries and they came to the UK not knowing a single word of English, let alone like money and networks and people, right? So they
yeah,
came here really with nothing. And so they really drilled that mentality into me that, if you want something, you have to work hard from it. It doesn't come easy. Nobody's going to hand it to you. There's nobody that we know to give you these opportunities. And so if you really want something, you
yeah,
have to work at it. And so I think that mentality shaped me really early on. And, as a young child, you're in school, you're doing academics. And, I was very much studious and trying to get the best grades because at that age, I thought, if I want a lifestyle that's better than my parents, and if I don't want to struggle in the same way that they're struggling, then academics and education is the only way out of this.
yeah. So that discipline of hard work and appreciating how important hard work is, I mean, that was instilled at an early age. And I think it's almost, I know that's the right word. It's like, you go into LinkedIn or whatever nowadays, and everyone's like, if you're not running a seven-figure business from the beach, drinking
Yeah,
sangrias like 2 hours
yeah,
a day, you're doing something wrong.
yeah.
And it couldn't be further from the truth. Most successful businesses, yes, is a good idea, but it starts with hard work. It starts with discipline. And I think as an entrepreneur, I guess that kind of serves you really well. But yeah, let's go to that second question is, did you envisage, when you were thinking about your career, you're learning to work hard, you're doing all these things, did you envisage becoming an entrepreneur when you were thinking about your career?
Funnily enough, no. Especially at a young age, I didn't. I don't think I knew what an entrepreneur was at that age. But I have this vivid memory of when I was a child. I would imagine my older self like in a suit, something powerful, and just, I don't know, making decisions. I have no idea where that image came from. I would imagine myself in future like that. But the entrepreneurship thing didn't kick in for a while for me. I think with my parents having risked so much coming here, they very much would champion the school route, the academics route. I think a lot of immigrant children can relate to this when I say it was like, be a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or something like that. So yeah, I didn't think about entrepreneurship for a long time, but my dad is an entrepreneur and his
Yeah,
circumstances were super different. He turned to that because at the time he just couldn't find a job that was, enough to support his young family. So he turned to entrepreneurship and that worked out well for him in the end, even though it was out of necessity rather than, this big dream that he had.
Yeah.
So I'd say I had that example when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's where it kind of went on. But no, I very much started my career thinking I'd climb the corporate ladder and keep doing that.
And maybe just share a little bit about that early career. So you finished school, you studied, just a little bit about your early career, and what was that sort of like trigger for you when you said, okay, cool, I'm now going to go and try this on my own, so to speak?
Yeah. Okay, so early career, I studied geography at university, nothing to do with finance. I just picked something that I enjoyed at the time. I had no idea what I wanted to do, in all honesty. So yeah, my logic was choose something you like and the answers will come to you later. I spent altogether 6 years in corporate finance before I started my own thing. And
Yeah.
a lot of that was finding my feet in finance. It's such a broad term. I graduated thinking I want to work in finance, but really, what does that mean? There's so many different jobs in there. So
Mm-hmm.
in the early stages, I worked in the accounts team for a recruitment firm. I did a little bit of consulting, a little bit of banking. I then fell into FP&A, and that was where I thought, okay, I really like this. This is where I want to stay. Did that for 3 or 4 more years following. Got really good at financial modeling and reporting and all of these things that 360 Finance offers today. And then I decided to take the leap essentially and start my own thing. I think the ideas were always bubbling inside me. I've always been super creative. I've always wanted to do my own thing at some point. I just didn't know what that looked like. So
Yeah.
yeah, it made sense for me to climb the corporate ladder a little bit whilst I figured that out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great place, especially in sort of a technical field like you're in, to actually learn the ropes and build that solid foundation, and also experiment. Like you have a little bit of a safety net where you're in a corporate career, and I guess that gets to sort of the next question, right? Is you then decided one day you woke up and hey, I'm going to start my own FP&A advisory firm, but talk about the early days of kind of launching a business. Yes, you had grown up in the UK, but I mean, you weren't in the entrepreneurial circles and all that. But what was it like launching a business with, maybe no connections or safety net? And what were some of the challenges and obstacles you faced when you started out?
It was hard for sure. I mean, everyone will say it's hard. Starting a business is just generally hard, right? But it was also really exciting, really fun. The unknown element of everything excited me. So at the same time of it being hard, I think what kept me through in those early days was the possibility of the unknown and what could happen out of this. And in the corporate world, you are limited to some degree. There's a ceiling that you can go to, and that ceiling takes a long time, right? Whereas I had broken out of that glass box, if you will, and it was so exciting, all of the possibilities that could happen. But yeah, the hard bits were definitely, starting a business relatively young. I'd only been in the corporate world for 6 years. So whilst
Mm,
that's enough time to get really good at FP&A and financial models, I left my corporate job without that many connections. Like it's not a long
mm,
time in order for you to be able to walk out with this long black book of trusted connections. So that was a little bit hard, starting not knowing anybody. But to your point
mm.
earlier, in this world that we live in with social media and everything, my way around that was LinkedIn and posting on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
connecting with people virtually. That really helped me forge connections in an
Well,
era
that's
where,
that's how we connected. I mean, so,
yeah, exactly.
across the ocean, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So difficult, but I think people talk about the difficulty a lot, but they forget to mention that it's also really exciting and fun.
Yeah. So you've been going for a few years now. I mean, have you ever felt like quitting on this journey? I mean, have there ever been months when you're like, yeah, where's the income coming from? Or you're just like, I've had enough.
Yeah, for sure. There are so many hard days. If the thought of quitting crosses my mind, I bat it away so quickly. Like, I don't know if it's something subconscious, but um, I think about it naturally. I think everyone does when you're having a really crappy day. But yeah, I've never entertained it seriously. I started the business a couple of months after I got a mortgage, so was really risky, to say the
To
least.
make it work.
Yeah, I wouldn't suggest anybody doing that. But no, at the time, of course, I have a co-founder, and that person is my fiance. So at the time, we made a plan, and we said, look, you're going to stay at your job for a few more months. I'm going to give this a go. If it doesn't work, there's always a job to fall back on. But if it does work, then you leave and as well, and we'll figure it out. But yeah, when quitting crosses my mind every now and then, but it's not something I seriously entertain, because I think to myself, I've got this goal and this thing that I'm trying to achieve, and I'm building something amazing. And if I quit, then I'm not going to get there. So I think that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, I mean, you might change direction a little bit, but I think that's at the heart of every entrepreneur. We never want to quit, and
Yeah.
even so-called failures are just it's just a kink in the road to something else, right?
Yeah. It's like a redirection.
Yeah. I'll come back a little bit later. I mean, obviously, your fiance is your co-founder, so I've got a question for that coming up just now. But let's go back to sort of, the sort of an immigrant family. I mean, if somebody saw you, they'd hear the British accent. I mean, they wouldn't probably have a clue that,
Yeah.
um, that you weren't British. But, internally, as I said, you shared some of the experiences about your parents, but what do you think in your experience makes immigrant entrepreneurs different? So whether it's what you saw in your dad or, what you see in yourself, what are some of those traits that you see?
I love this question because I think there's so many traits that immigrants have almost inherently, through their experiences, that make them fantastic entrepreneurs. Primarily, this fire in the belly to do really well, is something that I see a lot. And then there's so many aspects that you gain in life through hardship. For
Mm,
example, resilience, not backing down
mm.
at failure, not backing down when something doesn't go your way. I saw that left, right, and center when I was growing up in my parents, and they would just never give up. So I think that is a characteristic that immigrants have that I think is super useful in business. I think this empathy and this inner gratefulness of this opportunity that you have in your hands, and you don't take it for granted, and you try to do as much as you can with that, because like I said, back home
Mm.
maybe your family don't have the same opportunities. So you're not going to sit on your bum all day and do nothing, because you have something special and you have a lot of potential. I would say that. What else?
And it's almost the opposite of privilege or entitlement. You kind of there's a humility that comes with that, because you're starting from ground zero in many ways, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think people that are born and raised in the West are very lucky in a way that they don't realize. And it's something that I realized growing up. A lot of my friends had things handed to them in many ways, and things were planned for them. And, they had backing and advice and contacts and everything. And they didn't even realize how lucky they were. And only I saw that because I didn't have that and I had to find it myself. So just this awareness, of the fact that you have to work hard, you have to be resilient, you can't fall very easily. And yeah, I think all of those factors make for good entrepreneurs.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and understanding how they might be experiencing a situation.
Yeah.
Um, so I think you've touched on some of these, but how have you seen these values show up in your journey? Okay, so without repeating all of them, has it been a time or event or something where you've kind of actually looked and said, yeah, okay, yeah, one of these inherent characteristics has shown through, and people have maybe commented that or remarked on that. I mean, can you think of an example where one of these characteristics has come to the fore?
Yeah, I mean, so many come to mind. I think adaptability is a big one. I remember graduating and applying for jobs and just getting absolutely nowhere with it. Hundreds of applications, hundreds of
Yeah.
rejections. And I just remember at the time it not facing me at all. So I think that's one of the qualities, I guess, of an immigrant or somebody from that background. I think you just don't back down easily, and rejection doesn't bother you that much. Or even if it does, you let it bother you for 5 minutes, and then you move on and try again, and you stand back up and you
Yeah.
keep going. So I definitely had that. And another one that comes to mind is just general resourcefulness. If something's
Mm.
not easy, or obvious to you in any way. You just find a way to get there anyway. So another story I remember is during this time where I couldn't find a job, I was working as a waitress, and the applications weren't working, so I had to think outside of the box. And I remember just talking to the tables, and anyone that was dressed smart, and I'd overhear conversations about finance, and I'd be like, that's my table, I'm serving them, no one go there, that's mine. And I would talk to them, and that's how I got my first job, funnily enough, in finance. So I think the resourcefulness is another classic immigrant founder mentality.
I'll share a similar story on that. My business partner in the US, Kyle, I mean, he shares the story. He won a green card lottery to the US, and at 21 years old arrived in New York all on his own. And he couldn't find a job. And he used to dress up in a suit and tie and go hang out in the financial district with a drink. And that's how he got his first job. He was chatting to a guy at a bar and connected with him. And eventually he's like, well, how can I help you? Like, we're connecting. He says, actually, I'm desperate. I need a job. I've got like 3 weeks left of my rent, and I'm
Oh,
out. And,
wow.
it's that story, right? I mean, it's that putting yourself out there and, having to make a plan, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, Oh, no, I want to just talk a little bit about, we have touched on this, but the sort of pressure to succeed. And maybe it applied more to your parents than to you, but I think a lot of immigrant families carry this sort of invisible pressure of make it or else.
Hmm.
Did you ever experience that, or did you ever get the sense that your parents might have experienced that when you were growing up?
Yes, I definitely experienced that. I'm sure my parents experienced it as well, but we absolutely had that um, growing up. And for me, I think it was more self-inflicted than coming from my parents. Naturally, they wanted me to do well and they would push me to do well. But I think it came a lot from me as well. And just this notion that, you know,
Mm.
it wasn't just my burden that I'm carrying, but it's theirs as well. Because if I don't do well, then I'm kind of invalidating all of their sacrifices. Um, so yeah,
Yeah,
I would say definitely a lot of pressure to succeed. Yeah, especially as a child, I feel like that's quite a heavy weight to carry.
it is. Yeah, it's as you say, you've got this responsibility you're carrying from a young age. But do you think that pressure can be an advantage, or is it sometimes a bit of a double-edged sword?
Um, it's definitely an advantage. It's a double-edged sword too. I think with a lot of things in life, a lot of it is how you channel it or your perception, and you make what you want out of it. So it's 100% a double-edged sword because yes, pressure isn't nice and it's difficult to deal with. But it's also equally an advantage because without that pressure, maybe you don't have that push to do so well, and you wouldn't do the things that you're doing. So I think it can be an advantage. As with a lot of these things, what looks like a disadvantage on paper can very much be an advantage if you spin it. For
Mm.
example, you can say, oh, I don't have privilege because I don't have money or access to contacts. But, that very same thing gives you a certain grit and gives you a certain motivation and a certain push. So what looks like on
Yeah,
paper disadvantage can actually be really good as well. It just depends how you view it.
absolutely. And a lot of that's about the mindset and the lens you look at it through. So okay, so I'm going to move on a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about your business now. Okay,
Yeah.
so you've built 360 Finance. You touched a little bit on this, but why did you start 360 Finance? Besides the fact that you loved FP&A and modeling and that, and what problem when you stepped out of full time employment were you trying to solve?
This is a really good question. I think finance as an industry, and I know this is a blanket statement, but it's viewed as very backwards looking, like a compliance
Mm.
function. Um, just it's not really seen as a true value creator or a business partner. And that's something I noticed when I was working in big corporate. So as much as I loved what I
Yeah.
was doing and wanted to be an entrepreneur, all the puzzles kind of fit together in a way that, I noticed this trend in the industry, and that's something I really set out to change.
Yeah, so you wanted to be more forward looking and as a planning tool rather than as you say, count the beans afterwards kind of thing. Um,
Exactly, exactly.
yeah. So as you've been building 360, how has your background, I guess, shaped your leadership style, the business culture you're trying to create in the business? How do you think that's influenced how you show up every day?
Um, I think my leadership style is, I would say I definitely lead with empathy. Um,
Mm.
Quite direct. I think I probably get that from my background. And I have a lot of trust in people that I work with. So I think my background has
Yeah,
shaped my
yeah.
leadership style quite a lot. But I would say I expect people to have this mentality of, figure it out. If you don't know, find a way, learn it, and figure it out. And I think when I see people with that attitude, I will help in my own leadership way to help them figure that out. But I really like that mentality in people that I come across. So yeah, I'd say that's my leadership style.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, because you say so many people have a victim mentality, but I think, kind of what you're talking about, what's coming through here is it's what anybody can choose to be a victim, or anyone can take their situation and turn it to their advantage. And I think that comes through, in what you're building every day, the way you show up and all of that. I think for me, that kind of encapsulates a little bit about you and a little bit about 360 finance, and hopefully your clients get to experience that on a day-to-day basis. Um, you touched on it a bit earlier, but you mentioned that you started 360 Finance with your spouse. I don't know if he was your fiance at the time or partner. I
Yeah,
mean, in today's world, it's never just like boyfriend. I'm a
yeah,
lot older than you, so
all the
boyfriend,
labels.
fiance, husband or wife. Yeah. Anyway, so building a business with your significant other. Can you share a little bit about what that's been like?
Yeah, I mean, the response I get when I tell people I lead a business with my fiance is very mixed, naturally, and I understand completely. I think it's not for everyone, for sure. Um, but no, it works out really well for us, I would say. Personally, I really enjoy the idea that we're building something together, and our life goals are the same, and we're both working towards the same thing. And naturally, when there's really tough days, you have each other to confide in.
Yeah.
Equally, when you have a great day, you can celebrate together. So for me, that I really like that. Um, I think also we have very different personalities. Like my strengths and weaknesses are quite literally the opposite to his strengths and weaknesses. So I think that creates a nice balance as well.
Yeah, I think that's so important that you can complement each other. And you said building something together is always a superpower, right?
Yeah.
As you say, like that importance of, maybe this comes back to the immigrant thing, is you have to rely on your close circle. So
Mm.
maybe that's another strength of immigrant families, is that you rely on your close circle because you don't have broader networks. So maybe it's something you actually intrinsically just do that maybe people with a more Western background or different upbringing might not appreciate.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. I like that actually. The village mentality of leaning on who's close to you, and also
yeah,
sharing everything, good and the bad.
100%. So before we wrap up, a couple more questions. What advice would you give to somebody who's just landed in a new country and is dreaming of starting something new?
Um, I would say that you've already done the hardest bit.
Hmm.
So many people don't have the bravery and the courage that it takes to drop absolutely everything they know and start from scratch elsewhere, especially as an adult. As a child, you're just following your parents and it's easy. But if you've done that as an adult, then you're more courageous and braver than 99% of people, I would say. So the hardest bit is over. And with that in mind, if you can do that, you can do anything you want. I would say that. I would say that it's important to accept that, your journey might be 10 times harder than somebody who's a native for many
Mm.
reasons, and that's okay, but it doesn't have to hinder you or stop you. Um,
Yeah,
I would say, intelligence is great, but it can only get you so far, and you need people. Um, and naturally, in a new place, you don't have those people, but that doesn't mean you can't find them. And so put yourself out there, whether that's online, whether that's in person, join communities and networks and events, um,
yeah.
to start to forge those connections yourself. Just because you don't have them built in, it's not a reason to not do it.
Absolutely. As you say, it's about taking action, putting yourself out there, and it's hard, you, but it doesn't stop you from doing that.
Yeah.
So if you were to give yourself, and you've given some really, I think, powerful wisdom so far, but if you were to tell yourself, your younger self, um, I don't know what younger self is 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Um, if you were to give yourself one piece of advice back then, what you know now, what would that be?
Gosh, I think I would tell my younger self to stop putting so much pressure on yourself. Um, to be honest, I still tell myself that now. I've gotten better at doing that, but yeah, I think I would tell her to relax a little bit because things are gonna work out as they always do, and stop stressing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so powerful. Like as you say, it's almost inbuilt into you. You probably don't realize that you put that pressure on yourself,
Yeah,
because that's just kind of what you've known, and you've seen your parents have that pressure, and it's not a burden, but it's kind of, maybe other people who haven't had that kind of background upbringing don't always appreciate. So you're right. You have to remind yourself every time that
yeah,
you don't have to have that. You don't have to have that noose
exactly.
around your neck or that pressure. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's super powerful. I don't just as we wrap up, um, some final thoughts on building a business of value. What does that mean to you? And I'm bringing in a little bit of the bizval angle right at the end here. Okay, so um, second generation immigrant, studied geography, went into the corporate world, doing something completely different. Now you're an entrepreneur, your own business person, and working with other businesses, building stuff and doing cool stuff. But what does that mean to you? Building a business of value, in your words.
Um, I think this is a layered question, right? Because building a business of value from a customer lens is, doing something that they can't do in short, or doing it faster or more efficiently. But building a business of value to me means building something that's bigger than yourself, that can leave behind a legacy, um, that is designed around the certain lifestyle that you want, and also makes you proud as well as profitable. You start a business to be profitable, but something that makes you proud at the same time, and you can be proud to look at it and say, I did that.
I love that. It's not just about, I mean, obviously a valuable business makes money and is sellable, but it's so much more than that. I mean, make you proud and make your family proud and make those around you proud. And I think just with that sort of guiding North Star, so to speak, is such a wonderful way to look at it.
Yeah.
So I want to share a little bit, give our listeners an opportunity just to where can they find out more about you and 360 Finance? Can you just share your contact details and you know best way to get hold of you?
Yeah, sure. LinkedIn is probably the best place to get a hold of me. And our company website, which is www.360finance.com.
And it's spelled slightly differently, right? The S is a numerical six, not an S, right?
Yes, that's actually important. I forgot to mention that. The S is a six. Oh, I'm easier to find on LinkedIn, and then you can find the website.
So you really are a creative accountant.
Yes, exactly.
Arta, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today, and just thank you for sharing your story, being honest, being open, and I guess being vulnerable. It takes a lot to come out on a podcast and just share the journey, and I'm sure our listeners are going to take huge value out of this. I hope this is not the last time we see you on our podcast. Maybe in 5 years' time we're going to talk about your exit to PE. I don't know, whatever it is,
I hope
but
so.
thank you, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you so much for having me.